What's up, future Shredlords? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. Got a cool question on the Twitters. You know, what's the difference between a scale and a mode? I'm struggling here. Essentially, the big problem most people have is with dimension. They don't realize that this term modes creates depth, right? So you start off with like surface level knowledge, like a diatonic scale has 7 notes, right? Like a major scale. Right? What else is a diatonic scale? The melodic minor, that's a diatonic scale. The harmonic minor, that's a diatonic scale. The pentatonic scale, is that diatonic? No. Pentatonic's its own thing because it only has 5 notes, not 7. Diatonic means 7, essentially, even though I don't think it does. It just means a scale that has 7 notes, right? So, and that's the big ones that we use, obviously, so that's why diatonic becomes important. Right, but this idea is that there's this home base, right? So I start off with the chromatic scale, all 12 notes, subtract a few, get down to the diatonic level. Now I have 7 notes. I want to do that process again, start to isolate each one of these notes and then build a whole new scale system off it. And then I give them fancy names. So when I start off the first degree of a G major scale, I get the Ionian mode, right? Or the Ionian position, I should say, but a lot of people call it the Ionian mode, and it's just because of the way that the interval structure works, but I'm going to say it's the Ionian position just for the sake of argument here. Obviously, moving up to the 2nd degree, Dorian position, 3rd degree, Phrygian, then Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and back to Ionian again, and it carves out these regions on the fretboard, right? And that's just it. I can now think dimensionally. If a major chord happens on the 1st degree, the 4th degree, and the 5th degree, then when I'm starting the scale on the 1st degree, I can either play the Ionian mode, the Lydian mode, or Mixolydian. I have those 3 choices because they're all incredibly closely related. Now, obviously, one's going to sound better than another, but all 3 are going to work. Same thing with the minors, which I do with the pentatonic. We're going to talk about it in a sec here. But essentially with the minors, I've got 6, 2, and 3, right? Which is Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian, right? And Aeolian's the one that everybody knows, the natural minor, right? The minor pentatonic scale, whatever, the classic. So just sort of superimposing Dorian over top like I do in this video quite frequently just to make that one really prevalent because those two work awesome together. That's another piece of music knowledge there, that the Dorian position is going to be the preferred sort of alternate scale to set up the Aeolian scale. You see what I mean? Like all of these little pieces of information build on top of each other. Where Phrygian's going to create more tension, you might want to use that if you're going to kind of use diminished in the Aeolian position. You see what I mean? It's when you're playing in the position and then when you're starting to superimpose something borrowed from somewhere else, it's going to work too. Because you have like 3, 4, 5 different choices at the same spot. They're not really static, right? So, and that comes from this basic principle that I get a major chord at 1, 4, and 5 and a minor chord at 2, 3, and 6. So I can take those and start to overlap them, and that's what gives me the modal sounds. Now, playing modally is when I substitute. If I was essentially playing G major, starting on the 3rd fret, low E string, and then all of a sudden I move the Lydian configuration there and start playing that, and then move to Mixolydian, and then keep going with Aeolian, Locrian, then Ionian. That way, then I'm basically playing in the Lydian mode. If I were to do Mixolydian, and then Aeolian, then Locrian, then Ionian, moving up in that sequence, Mixolydian mode, right? So it's when I take the mode itself and I move it back to whatever key I'm playing in, G major. So I would take the scale that I play at D, move it back to where G is, and start everything from there. Everything else stays relative. The distances between the scales, the sequences of notes, 3 notes per string of the classical method, whatever you're playing, that stuff stays all exactly the same. And I demonstrated at the end of this video here with a couple exercises essentially with the pentatonic scale, right? So again, in the first one, I'm using variants of 2, 3, and 6, right? Again, in G sharp minor, there's obviously the G sharp Dorian pentatonic I'm doing there, and I'm also doing G sharp Phrygian pentatonic. See how I don't bother try to think of the parent key. I just think that I have those 3 choices: Aeolian, Dorian, and Phrygian, and each of those 3 choices comes with a scale shape, And all I do is just substitute in. And then the practice part is to start off with one scale and then end in another scale and then end your idea, which you'll hear me do. Moving down to that first position there, the F or F sharp or whatever it is, makes a huge difference in how the idea feels like it comes to a close. Okay, so that right there is another massive one. And of course, you see me get even more extreme by moving at half steps relative to each other. You'll hear me do that in the second half of this exercise. And that's a lot more tricky, but you can hear immediately how badass it sounds, especially that Mixolydian one that I do in the first little salvo. Start off with, the Phrygian position, move up a half step into Mixolydian with the pentatonic, a little chromaticism in there, and just, oh my God, get it done, kid, right? So that's what I'm talking about. It's this whole new dimension to your playing. But again, it's the same scale system. It's always the pentatonic scale system, just played relative to itself 3 different ways. The first time I'm doing it in the key, just using the standard one with the minor pentatonic. Then I'm going to go to the next most tension-filled version of it. That's Dorian. So I'm going to start off with the Dorian scale, then move to Phrygian, then move to Mixolydian, move to Aeolian, then to Ionian. Nails it. And of course, after that, I'm going to move to Phrygian and do the same thing. It'll be the same sequence. Phrygian would move to Mixolydian, Aeolian, then Ionian and Dorian again before you get back to Phrygian, an octave higher. So that's how the whole scales and modes and everything else. The scales things just puts it into sort of like a manageable, compartmentalized chunk of information. Right? But after that, you start using modalization to break that small piece of information into a much bigger piece of information. And then, of course, you start to use superimposition to be like, look, I can take it and start layering over top of itself just by moving these scale systems around. Instead of starting on Ionian, start with Lydian, and then do everything relative to that. Start on Mixolydian, do everything relative to that. Instead of doing the minor pentatonic, do Dorian or Phrygian and then play everything relative to that. And of course, train your ear to hear more of these outside sounds. There it is. That's the whole video. So at the end here, you'll see me do a practice exercise, essentially slowly and then more speedily. And then at the end, you see me do the more fancy version, of course, to get the more sort of fusiony outside sounds. But of course, again, using nothing but the pentatonic scale. And maybe once in a while, I might sneak one of the minor 7 variants of the dominant 7 arpeggio systems in there, but that's just because it's almost interchangeable with the pentatonic scale, and it's cooler sort of to play an arpeggio into the pentatonic rather than just 2 pentatonics. And for practice value, obviously 2 different ideas there. So again, you're seeing the difference. And I guess to leave off here, you'll see that at the beginning here, when I do it, it's a lot more fast and loose and mistakes just flying all over the place. And at the end here, it's a little bit more sort of reserved and sort of constructed and whatnot. And that's the difference. That's a practice exercise. And the beginning is me actually practicing being, creative and trying to innovate by adding many, many, many different systems together using arpeggios and scales and the pentatonics and everything else, superimposition, the whole 9 yards. That's all of it together, just off the top of my head, in the moment, go, right? But this one at the end here is me sort of working on putting a couple of these things together so that when I do it next time, I'm like, oh yeah, remember that one, moving up to the Mixolydian? That's really badass. And then it just becomes part of your guitar repertoire. Nails it. Okay, I'm done now. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate you guys. Every single goddamn one of you. 2026. Dominate. See you in the next one.